Early October 1919, he dropped off a B&O freight from Cumberland into Washington's New Jersey Avenue yards, and something about the city felt wrong before he'd gone 100 yards from the platform. Washington in October 1919 was still processing the war. 300,000 federal workers in a district built for 80,000, and the bread lines from Union Station to the Anacostia Flats showed what demobilization looked like from the ground. 2 days in, the rumors started moving through the labor lines. Something had happened at the White House, the man at the coal yard told him. Something bad. Nobody official was saying anything yet. The notes say he watched 2 automobiles leave the White House gate that second evening. No flags, moving fast. And then the gate stayed closed, and the city that had been too quiet got quieter still. He'd come up from Baltimore on a freight that took 3 days to find, sitting outside Laurel while the B&O sorted a yard dispute, watching September burn off the morning dew along the track bed. Baltimore to Washington was 26 miles of B&O main line, covered in a boxcar of war surplus crates, the kind the armistice had left stacked on platforms from here to Pittsburgh, still waiting. He found work the first afternoon. Coal delivery off the Georgetown branch, 12 hours for 80 cents. And by the last drop, he knew which missions were cheap and which blocks the Metropolitan Police patrolled after dark. Let me tell you what Washington was carrying that October, because you need to understand it before you can understand what the silence meant. The president hadn't been seen publicly for 11 days, and his office was calling it fatigue. Woodrow Wilson had left Washington on September 3rd, heading west. 29 states in 27 days, 40 speeches from Columbus to San Diego, a body visibly failing under the weight of what it was being asked to carry. His physician, Dr. Cary Grayson, had been watching closely since Street. Louis. The headaches before major speeches, the trembling left hand, the fact that by Pueblo, Colorado, Wilson couldn't finish a sentence without stopping to breathe. On September 25th in Pueblo, Wilson gave his last public speech, and then the presidential train turned east, curtains drawn, and no crowd would see the President of the United States again for nearly 8 months. 2 days in, when the rumor reached the coal yard, the president was badly sick, worse than they were saying, and a woman at the D Street Mission said the city felt like it was waiting for something. His name does not appear in these notes, not once. Whether that was deliberate or whether the notes simply never reached the pages where he wrote it. We don't know yet. If you want to be here when we find out, subscribe. The road continues. On the morning of October 2nd, 1919, inside the White House, Woodrow Wilson collapsed while shaving. A massive stroke that paralyzed the left side of his body, destroyed his peripheral vision, and left the 28th president unable to govern. He spent that morning on the National Mall watching the federal buildings along the avenue. The pattern of arrivals had changed, fewer departing, more coming in cars, and the guards at every gate had doubled. What the public was told, nervous exhaustion, rest required. What doctor? Grayson finally told the cabinet the president could not read documents, could not hold sustained conversations, and could not sign papers without assistance. Edith Wilson made the decision herself, or the decision formed around her in the first days, the way a crisis will, in the space between what was happening and what anyone was willing to say out loud. She had been married to Wilson 4 years, a second marriage for both, and she understood what was at stake if the world learned the full extent of his condition while the League vote was still pending. She began screening everything: documents, visitors, cabinet communications. Senators who demanded access were told the president was resting. The Secretary of State was told the same. Every message that reached the president went through her first. He found a second week's work raking leaves at Lafayette Square. 20 cents an hour, 6 hours a day, close enough to the White House fence that he could see the south lawn from the tool shed. The south lawn was empty every day he worked there. In the previous October, staff and visitors had moved across the grounds in the visible routine of a working government. That October, nothing moved at all. He stood at the fence line one evening, work done, the White House lit behind the iron bars, and the notes record a single light behind the second-floor windows, watched for nearly half an hour before it went out. Secretary of State Robert Lansing had been pushing for a cabinet response since the first week. Article 2 was clear enough, he argued, and if the president was incapacitated, someone in authority needed to say it. The response, delivered through an intermediary, was short. The president was not incapacitated. The president was resting, and if Lansing persisted in calling unauthorized cabinet meetings, the president would want to know who had given him that authority. This is not the kind of thing that shows up clearly in the official record. The cabinet minutes from those months are careful in a way that tells you exactly what everyone in that room chose not to write down. Vice President Thomas Marshall had been kept formally uninformed. The White House would not confirm the president's condition, and Marshall refused to act on rumor alone, knowing exactly what a mistake there would cost him. Day 4, he found road crew work near the Lincoln Memorial, $1.10 for 10 hours filling ruts along the approach road, and that night the G Street boarding house cost him 25 cents, a cot between two men who'd been there a month already. G Street between 9th and 10th had 6 boarding houses that year. The city had overflowed its lodging since the war buildup began, and a man with a day's wage could sleep off the ground, which in October in Washington was the only calculation that mattered. The newspapers were not printing the full story. He could see that from the boarding house table each morning. The headlines careful, the prose controlled, the letters to the editor running harder questions than anything in the actual copy. The man across the table at G Street was a postal clerk from Dayton. Cousin worked at the Congressional Printing Office, he said, and word coming out of there was the president had been left side since Colorado. That was the specific word, left side. Here is what you need to understand about the government district in that October. The rumor moved without the newspapers, neighborhood to neighborhood, labor line to boarding house, the way information is always moved when the official channels go silent. What we have from those first weeks is Edith Wilson's own memoir, published decades later, Lansing's private diary, and a set of senator correspondence files that a researcher found in the National Archives in 1962. Together, they give us a partial reconstruction. She determined which bills reached him for signature. She managed which foreign communications were summarized and which were withheld. She controlled physical access to the bedroom where he was confined. Every lever of executive power passed through her hands. The Senate opposition had a documented case, and they knew it. No elected executive had been governing for more than 3 weeks. The Versailles Treaty vote was approaching, and nothing in the Constitution specified what happened if the president was alive but incapacitated. Day 5, the road crew finished early. They'd run out of gravel, and he walked the mall in the flat October light with the Capitol dome filling the eastern sky, the shadow of the building reaching almost to where he stood. The Capitol that week was running at a temperature the district hadn't seen since the war vote. Lodge's Reservations Committee demanded a response on the Versailles Treaty, and the White House was producing nothing coherent, nothing signed, nothing that could be read as executive direction. On October 6, the Senate subcommittee finally got in. Senators Fall and Hitchcock, a brief meeting in the White House bedroom, and it was Edith who ran the conversation, answered most of the questions, and positioned Wilson so the left side was always in shadow. He was raking the south edge of Lafayette Square when the Senate automobile left the White House that afternoon. The notes say he followed it 2 blocks east on foot, watching the vehicle move away until it rounded the corner toward the hill. Senator Fall came out and told waiting reporters the president seemed satisfactory. What the diary record shows, Wilson was propped against the headboard, the left side of his face slack, and Edith answered 3 of Fall's 4 questions before Wilson could formulate a response. Here is what everyone in Washington's government district knew that week and what almost nobody wrote down. The United States of America was being administered by a woman who had not been elected, had not been confirmed, had taken no oath of office, and answered to no constitutional authority for what she was doing. She called it stewardship. That was her word, the word she used in the memoir, the word she gave the press when she finally addressed the question years later. Stewardship. It is the precise word of someone who has decided very carefully not to say which side of the line they were standing on. The League of Nations vote failed. The Treaty of Versailles went unsigned by the United States. Lansing was fired in February 1920, the stated reason, holding unauthorized cabinet meetings. The unstated reason was already obvious to everyone who had been watching. He left on the 6th morning before the boarding house served breakfast. The B&O coal yards were moving freight north by 4, and by the time the city was lighting its stoves, he was already on the far side of the Maryland line, the Capitol dome behind him. The stewardship, whatever it was, lasted 17 months total, from October 1919 until Warren Harding's inauguration on March 4, 1921. For a year and a half, the executive branch of the United States government operated in a condition that the Constitution had not anticipated. Riding north that morning, he didn't know that the signatures being placed on certain executive documents over the next 12 months would later be questioned by constitutional scholars, or that the handwriting on some of them didn't match the president's documented signature from before the stroke. The 25th Amendment to the Constitution, which would have provided a clear legal process for presidential incapacity, was not ratified until February 1967, 46 years after Wilson's stroke, 11 years after Eisenhower's first heart attack, and far too late for anything that happened in that White House bedroom in October 1919. She believed, and said so in the memoir, that she had saved his life by shielding him from decisions that would have destroyed what little capacity remained. The alternative, she wrote, was watching him collapse entirely or resign. She chose neither for him. Constitutional scholars who reviewed the period decades later reached a consistent finding. For 17 months, the United States had no functionally capable elected executive in operation. The Republic continued. The laws were signed, the decisions were made. The record shows all of it, and also shows who made them. The road north was cold and slow, the way Maryland freight always moved in October, and the notes say the Capitol dome stayed visible for a long time before the terrain finally took it, the dome shrinking into the pale overcast until there was nothing left but the haze and the flat fields. If this is the kind of historical storytelling you want to keep following, subscribe to the channel. More roads, more cases, more of what the official record left out. And if you know this era, this region, or this kind of road, tell us in the comments what you know, what the records missed, what your family remembered that nobody wrote down. The people who lived this history are the reason anyone can reconstruct it. We want to hear from them.